In the bleakest moments of existence, when it feels as though a part of your soul has irrevocably faded with a person who has passed, a tormenting question arises. How do you find the strength to move forward? Humanity has, for centuries, attempted to brace itself for the inevitability of loss, but no matter how diligent these attempts, the moment it strikes turns one's entire accustomed reality upside down. Suddenly, as if by an unknown command, time itself seems to stand still, its flow becoming illusory. Yet the world around continues its ceaseless course. People bustle about, living their ordinary lives, completely unaware that someone's personal universe has just crumbled into an abyss. A person consumed by grief finds themselves paralyzed, frozen in a moment that feels infinitely long, a prisoner of an emotional void whose depth and pain, it seems, no one else can truly comprehend. Words of comfort, uttered with the best intentions, ring merely as hollow echoes, incapable of either assuaging the unbearable pain or silencing the gnawing, deafening stillness that has settled within. Something deep within the soul silently screams, desperately calling for answers, for relief, for some understanding in this chaos. Death has, throughout history, remained the greatest and most incomprehensible mystery known to humanity. Since time immemorial, it has instilled profound fear, inflicted unbearable suffering, and stripped people of the illusion of control over their own destiny. Yet paradoxically, it is the only absolute certainty granted to us in this earthly life. It is what each of us will sooner or later have to face, regardless of position or desire. But what if we were to imagine that the loss of a loved one, however crushing and devastating it may seem, is not merely a definitive end? What if it could also be a harbinger of something else, the beginning of a new stage? Carl Gustav Jung, an eminent thinker and psychiatrist, possessed a deep understanding of what many still struggle to grasp. He was convinced that death has a transformative effect not only on the one who leaves this world, but just as importantly, on those who remain. For when a person loses someone they loved selflessly, they mourn not just the physical absence of another, they also grieve for a version of themselves, for that part of their personality that existed only in connection with that person, and which, alas, will never return. However, perhaps it is precisely in this painful farewell that the key to astonishing discoveries and an entirely new understanding of oneself and the world lies. What is this transformation, and what awaits those who dare to walk through this darkness? Loss, as a powerful catalyst, relentlessly prompts a person to profound self-reflection, forcing them to confront questions they previously tried to avoid. It pushes them to a relentless search for meaning amidst the chaos that seems to engulf everything. This force shakes the very foundations of human identity, challenging preconceived notions of self. Every farewell, every parting carries not just pain for the departed, but also an uncomfortable, sometimes painful truth about one's own identity. Grief, in essence, is not only sorrow for another person, it is primarily directed at us. It reveals who we were when they were with us and who we become without them. It is at this moment of existential upheaval that Carl Jung offers a fundamentally new perspective on what is happening. He invites us to delve deep beneath the surface of consciousness, into the hidden, uncharted layers of the human psyche. At the very core of the human unconscious, according to Jung, lies something fundamental and timeless. It is an ancient, universal pattern that invisibly connects everyone who has ever experienced loss. Jung referred to this as the collective unconscious, a vast, shared repository for all humanity of symbols, emotions, and meanings, a psychological network that transcends time, culture, and language. And among the countless images of this grand psychological landscape, the most powerful and ancient image stands out, the archetype of death. For centuries, through the lens of various civilizations and diverse belief systems, the phenomenon of death has consistently been perceived not as a definitive end, but as a powerful force of transformation. Thus, in the civilization of ancient Egypt, it symbolized nothing less than a gateway leading to boundless eternity. In the philosophical system of Buddhism, death appears as an inevitable transition to a new cycle of being, to a different state of existence. Even in our dreams and myths, death often appears not as a final curtain descending on the stage of life, but as a threshold, a symbolic passage that opens the door to something entirely new. This profound metaphor lives in the consciousness of every person. The loss of a loved one inevitably initiates a process of the deepest personal transformation. It is an ordeal that seems to tear a person apart, but it is precisely in this painful process that the call to recreate oneself from the ashes of the past lies. Ultimately, a person emerges from it changed, not always completely healed of wounds, but invariably transformed. And it is this transformation that can reveal such depths and facets in the individual consciousness, the existence of which was previously unknown. However, a profound dilemma arises: how to find true meaning amidst all-consuming sorrow. How does one find glimmers of light when everything around seems like impenetrable darkness? And how does one transform a shattered heart into a source of personal growth instead of allowing it to become a cause of lifelong torment? This path must be walked thoughtfully and collaboratively. This exploration will examine how one can confront the loss of a loved one using the lens of Carl Gustav Jung's depth psychology. This approach involves not passive resignation, but deep understanding, not forgetting the experience, but integrating this loss into the very essence of the developing personality. For even if life currently seems devoid of all meaning, even if one is consumed by the unbearable weight of grief, there is a path that leads not only to liberation from pain, but also to the discovery of a deeper version of oneself. And it all begins with comprehending the true meaning of grief, not just as an emotional reaction, but as a comprehensive psychological transformation affecting the very foundations of the soul. Next, it will be revealed why death leaves such an indelible and profound imprint on the human psyche. It will be thoroughly explored how the archetype of death affects our most intimate emotions, often remaining outside the realm of conscious perception. For only by encountering this inner mythology, this unconscious narrative, can one begin the process of transforming personal pain into something far more powerful and constructive than mere suffering. Death instills a deep, almost primal fear in humans. It forces one to come face to face with the unknown, with what cannot be changed. It mercilessly dispels all illusions of the eternal and unchanging. However, one should ask, does humanity truly fear the act of dying itself, or is it actually haunted by the relentless idea of complete annihilation, the thought of ceasing to exist, being irrevocably forgotten, turning into nothing? This question, extending beyond purely philosophical considerations, touches the deepest parts of the human soul, and the answer to it, in turn, shapes our ways of experiencing grief, determines the quality of our lives, and ultimately influences the process of healing from loss. The great thinker Carl Jung deeply understood this truth. Death, in his view, is far more than just an act of biological termination. It is a universal archetype, a primal image deeply embedded in the collective unconscious, which for centuries has defined the nature and experience of loss for humanity. From ancient civilizations with their complex burial rituals to our modern era, death has taken on diverse forms and acquired multifaceted meanings. However, despite cultural and temporal differences, one thing has remained constant: its unyielding psychological impact on the human psyche. But why is it so difficult for a person to reconcile with this fundamental truth? The answer to this question, though seemingly simple, carries deep discomfort. Humanity tends to be captivated by the illusion of permanence and eternal existence. People convince themselves of the infinity of time allotted to them, of the unchanging presence of loved ones, of unlimited opportunities to express their feelings and fulfill cherished desires. This self-assurance lasts until the sudden disappearance of a dear person shatters the familiar order. At that moment, harsh reality crashes down like a devastating tidal wave. The realization of one's own finitude arrives. The ego, that inner instance that futilely strives to control all aspects of being, desperately resists accepting this undeniable truth. It fiercely resists clinging to old beliefs. For acknowledging the fact of death means agreeing that everything that has been created, everything that is valued, everything that defines one's self-identity is ultimately destined to vanish. It is for this reason that grief inflicts such unbearable pain. For it is not merely the loss of another person, it is a direct and immediate confrontation with one's own inevitable mortality. It is here that humanity finds its support in myths, rituals, and beliefs. This is a centuries-old toolkit developed by civilizations to make sense of and cope with the sometimes unbearable reality of the inevitable end. Ancient Egyptians erected grand pyramids, striving to ensure immortality and continued existence beyond the threshold of earthly life. The Aztecs, in turn, solemnly celebrated the Day of the Dead to express profound reverence for their departed ancestors. Tibetan monks practiced special death meditations in which they visualized their own passing to dissolve deep existential fear. Each culture, following its unique paths, developed ways to imbue this inevitable phenomenon with meaning. However, what happens in the modern world? Humanity today lives in a society that has largely stripped it of traditional rites and rituals associated with death. It is a society that insistently dictates that individuals move on quickly, without lingering. Grief, it believes, must be buried, pain pushed to the background, and everyday life resumed as if nothing tragic had happened. And it is precisely here that the real problem lies. When people ignore the deeper, more profound meaning of death, they rob themselves, depriving themselves of one of the most powerful lessons it can offer. It is an opportunity to look into the deepest corners of one's being, to question one's own existence, and finally, to fill one's life with true meaning before it is irreparably too late. So how can one begin to meaningfully confront this reality? How can one embrace the inevitability of demise without succumbing to all-consuming terror? How can one transform grief from a bottomless abyss into a path of personal growth and spiritual awakening? The key lies in understanding grief as a process of profound inner metamorphosis. It is a journey that not only plunges a person into the depths of suffering, but also reveals hidden truths that they would otherwise stubbornly continue to ignore. For even when the surrounding world seems to stand still, something within the individual continues to evolve and move, and it is this circumstance that fundamentally changes one's entire perception. Grief appears before a person as an uncontrollable force, like a raging whirlwind in which they initially plunge into despair, then desperately fight its onslaught, and finally gradually gain the ability to stay afloat. However, the bitterest truth that must be accepted is that there are no easy shortcuts. One cannot avoid suffering, one cannot pretend that the bitterness does not exist. Carl Jung, the eminent thinker, realized that the passing of a loved one does not merely deprive us of their physical presence. This event compels us to confront a merciless reflection, a mirror of our own psyche. Each stage of grief appears as a threshold, as a door. Each one prompts profound self-analysis, forcing one to look within. Each stage draws the individual, regardless of their will, into the deepest layers of their own being. This entire process begins with denial. In this initial moment, when the mind tries to convince itself, this is impossible, this isn't real, the question arises, what is actually being so stubbornly denied? When discussing the concept of the shadow, Carl Jung referred to those aspects of personality that a person tries to hide from themselves and others, those sides they do not wish to confront. In the stage of denial, the shadow becomes a kind of refuge. The individual tries to convince themselves that the old state of affairs persists. They cling to familiar routines as if no fundamental changes have occurred. However, deep down, everyone knows that something within them has already irrevocably transformed. In a state of denial, a person buries fear, guilt, and profound sorrow, nurturing the illusion that if ignored, it will simply disappear. But in reality, this only drives the pain deeper until it inevitably erupts with even greater force. Then, like an inevitable wave, anger rolls in. When the protective barrier of denial can no longer hold, an indomitable fury breaks through to the surface. A person unleashes it on themselves, on others, on higher powers, on the very fabric of the universe. At this moment, they desperately seek a culprit, Tormenting questions arise. Why did this happen? Why me? Carl Jung, the eminent thinker, explained that many of our unresolved inner experiences are projected onto the external world. The point is not that we genuinely hate others, it is that the weight of pain becomes so unbearable that it cannot be carried alone. Sometimes this acute indignation transforms into latent resentment, while other times it leads to self-destructive behavior. However, beneath the surface of all this raging fury lies a profound truth that a person fears to face. The true feeling that drives them is all-consuming fear. For when the storm of anger subsides, what remains? The next attempt of the human mind to evade harsh reality manifests in the phenomenon of bargaining. The ego, desperately seeking to regain lost control over the situation, feverishly searches for unattainable solutions. Thoughts race through the mind. If only I had acted differently, this wouldn't have happened. If I try hard enough, maybe the pain will recede. People cling to the illusory belief that somehow, in an incomprehensible way, they can reverse the inevitable event. However, deep inside, on a subconscious level, one realizes that this stage is merely a brief respite, a lull before the inevitable final blow of fate. When the bargaining stage exhausts itself, the harsh reality appears in all its fullness. It is then that the deepest grief sets in. At this stage, all commotion and external noise subside. There is no more inner struggle, no more excuses. Only an immense, all-consuming emptiness envelops the consciousness. However, contrary to popular misconception, the state of depression experienced during grief is not a pathology. It rather serves as a bridge, an invitation to delve into the most intimate corners of the human psyche. The renowned thinker Carl Jung often emphasized the exceptional importance of encountering one's inner darkness, the necessity of having the courage to fearlessly plunge into the depths of the unconscious. In his conviction, only in this abyss, far from distracting surface noise, can one truly find the answers sought. It is in this hidden realm that true transformation becomes possible. Here, grief ceases to be mere agonizing pain, transforming into a portal leading to something far greater. When an individual stops running from their sorrow, when they stop resisting and instead allow themselves to feel the full spectrum of emotions without judgment or struggle, something within them begins to irreversibly change. This transformation is not resignation, it is not forgetting the past, and it is not letting go in the simplified sense that many imagine. On the contrary, it is a true rebirth. When a person reaches the final stage of grief, it does not mean that suffering completely disappears. One should not assume that at this moment the individual miraculously regains their former wholeness, or that the emotional wound suddenly dissolves without a trace. In reality, it signifies that the personality learns to coexist with this experience. It ceases its internal struggle with it, mastering the ability to walk alongside it. True acceptance does not imply forgetting what happened or replacing what was lost. On the contrary, it is a process of profound integration, where the experience becomes an integral part of one's identity. As Jung noted, true individuation, the path to becoming one's own authentic self, is only possible when a person ceases to identify with what has been lost. At this moment, the realization comes that love does not fade with the person's passing. It does not disappear without a trace, but undergoes a profound transformation. It becomes something much deeper, something that finds its existence not in external reality, but within the inner world of the individual. This is the culminating moment when one realizes that life goes on. And this happens not because the loss was insignificant, but, on the contrary, because it held immense, all-encompassing significance, too great to allow it to dissolve into the abyss of despair. Clara realized this truth the moment her brother passed away prematurely. For many months, her existence was clouded by deep denial. She tirelessly convinced herself of his imminent return, insisting that what happened was just a tragic misunderstanding. The period of disbelief was followed by an onslaught of all-consuming anger, a rage at life itself, a burning bitterness expressed in desperate cries directed at the heavens. She tried to bargain with fate, pleading for a completely different outcome. for the possibility of turning back time. However, in the end, she was engulfed by bottomless grief, in which all meaning of existence was lost. The surrounding world grew dim, taking on shades of grey. The flow of time slowed to an unbearable crawl. She felt completely hollowed out, as if empty inside. And yet, amidst this inner silence that followed the storm of emotions, something subtle occurred. This change was as silent as it was almost imperceptible to an outside observer. Nevertheless, it was absolutely real. Gradually, Clara began to grasp that her brother had not truly disappeared. He continued to live in every memory, in every life lesson he had ever taught her, in every part of her being that had been transformed by his boundless love and unwavering presence. She never stopped longing for him, and her love for him remained unchanged, but she gained the ability to move forward on her life's path, carrying his image not as a heavy burden, but as an integral part of herself. For grief is not just the loss of someone dear, it is a profound re-evaluation and rediscovery of oneself on a level that previously seemed utterly impossible. One cannot avoid the pain that grief brings. No one can circumvent it. However, what one can truly do is allow this pain to guide them, to become their reliable compass through the deepest darkness. And when this happens, the mourner's life will never be the same. Grief is not limited to merely taking away a loved one. It also brings one to an encounter with something far more unsettling, with oneself. It is as if it holds up a mirror, forcing one to penetrate those corners of their soul they always tried to avoid. Losing someone is like the sudden illumination of the most hidden room of consciousness. And what is seen there doesn't always align with expectations. Carl Jung called this phenomenon the shadow, the sum of all hidden aspects of personality that have been suppressed, rejected, or buried throughout life. These facets of the psyche do not disappear simply because a person refuses to acknowledge them. On the contrary, they silently reside in the background, influencing one's actions, relationships, and perception of the world. The shadow contains the deepest fears, unvoiced doubts, unresolved guilt, and unspoken sorrows that one has never allowed themselves to feel. And one of the most powerful catalysts capable of exposing all these depths is precisely grief. Grief possesses an extraordinary and enigmatic energy. It doesn't just overwhelm one with the sorrow of loss. It reveals something far deeper. Suddenly, one discovers that they are not merely mourning the departed. They are confronting the fear of loneliness, the regret over words that were never spoken, the feeling of helplessness at the thought that perhaps something could have been changed. It's not just about what disappeared externally, it's about what remains, what continues to live within like a persistent echo. When a person passes away, a part of the mourner also fades. However, it's not just about the other person's departure, it's about encountering those aspects of oneself that lay dormant or, even more unsettling, were consciously ignored. Grief exposes what was carefully hidden. This includes the fear of being alone, the fear of not being good enough, the anxiety that life may never be the same. It awakens guilt for unspoken words, for missed opportunities, for time spent aimlessly when one naively believed there would always be more time. Suddenly one realizes that time is no longer infinite. Suddenly the understanding comes that it slips through one's fingers without warning. And in this oppressive silence, the most poignant and human question arises: what if? However, there is a profound understanding that eludes most people. These debilitating feelings of guilt and fear do not suddenly emerge to torment us unexpectedly. On the contrary, they have always been present within us. They merely lurked in secrecy, buried beneath the layers of daily routine, skillfully masked by endless distractions and veiled by the constant noise of our everyday lives. Grief is not the creator of new pain or suffering. It merely ruthlessly tears away the veils of illusion, forcing us to gaze intently at the pain that has always existed within us, patiently awaiting its moment. Anna encountered this harsh truth on the most personal, intimate level. When her mother passed away, Anna felt something fundamental within her irrevocably shattered. She, of course, anticipated sadness, She was even prepared for a flood of tears. However, what she was completely unprepared for was the grand emotional tsunami that surged in the wake of the loss. Waves of anger, burning shame, all-consuming guilt, and the unbearable weight of everything she had held captive for so long. For years, she had consciously avoided confronting the complex and tangled relationship she had with her mother. Unspoken words remained, unresolved grievances accumulated, and unhealed wounds continued to bleed. And now, in the oppressive silence left by her mother's absence, all of it relentlessly surfaced like a powerful tidal wave. Anna found herself trapped, mourning not only her departed mother, but also all those parts of herself she had so stubbornly suppressed throughout her life. This is where the true, profound essence of grief lies. It is not just the process of mourning what has been lost forever. It is, first and foremost, about what one never found the courage to truly confront. It is a reflection on who you were before this loss and who you are compelled to become after it. Such a process is inevitably uncomfortable. It brings unbearable pain. Yet, at the same time, it is also an invaluable opportunity for transformation. For when we dare to look into the most hidden corners of our inner world, when we decide to stop the endless flight and instead brave embracing our shadow, that is when our profound process of change truly begins. Something within us starts to shift steadily, and this is not a temporary, but a fundamental, permanently ingrained transformation. Grief, if allowed to fully manifest, can become something far greater than a mere farewell to what is lost. It can turn into a homecoming to the most honest, true, and authentic version of who we truly are. Profound grief can feel like a bottomless abyss, a gaping void that neither comfort nor the passage of time nor wise counsel seems capable of filling. But what if this deep suffering holds the potential for something more? Carl Jung, a prominent thinker, did not view pain as a dead end. On the contrary, he saw it as a sacred transformative process. Each grief, in his view, represents a unique psychological initiation. It's not merely an act of letting go of the departed. Rather, it's an encounter with a transformed version of one's self, one that has passed through the crucible of trials and emerged renewed. When a loved one leaves this world, changes occur not only in external reality, but also deep within an individual's inner world. And it is at this moment that many find themselves trapped, clinging to the past, desperately resisting the relentless flow of transformation, and stubbornly holding on to a former identity that no longer aligns with the new reality. Nevertheless, Jung asserted that pain can become true alchemy. It can serve as the raw material for profound rebirth. The paradox is that most people have been raised with the conviction to avoid suffering at all costs. They are often told, forget about it, move on, be strong. However, grief is not something that can simply be overcome and left behind. It is a process that requires deep integration, and to truly integrate this experience, one must go through it consciously. This means not evading it, not suppressing it, but feeling it, processing it, and allowing it to perform its transformative work. There are highly effective approaches to understanding and processing loss. One such powerful method is symbolic writing. One is encouraged to take a blank sheet of paper and write a message to the person they have lost. In this letter, one should express everything that remained unsaid. It's necessary to fearlessly articulate everything the heart still holds dear. Sometimes the greatest pain is caused not by the absence of the loved one itself, but by the oppressive silence left by unspoken words which one never dared to utter while the departed was alive. Another powerful tool that aids healing is active imagination. The renowned Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung actively employed it as a way to establish dialogue with his unconscious, allowing the mind to create images and internal dialogues that helped reveal what truly needed healing. One can close their eyes, visualize the person they have lost, then mentally speak with them and listen to what their unseen presence wishes to communicate. This too is a profound path to inner healing. Furthermore, there are personal rituals, not necessarily religious, but deeply symbolic actions that help a person give loss its rightful and dignified place in the chronicle of their life. This could be something as simple as lighting a candle daily in honor of the departed, or visiting a place that held special meaning for both, or creating a memorial corner that connects one to everything the departed represented. The purpose of these actions is not to forget. The goal is to transform pain into something that fosters personal growth. For profound grief can become the seed of inner rebirth. When one stops perceiving grief as an irreconcilable enemy and begins to understand it as a wise teacher, something profound and transformative opens up in their consciousness. What was lost in the physical world continues to live in one's psyche, in their thoughts, in their memories, in the indelible imprints left on their life. This path is not easy. It is full of trials. However, those who dare to walk it to the end are never the same. When one faces the departure of someone they truly love, they often feel as though an all-consuming emptiness completely overtakes their being. The conviction arises that this desolation will last forever, and a sense of wholeness will never return. However, grief, like any profound psychological process, is not merely an ending, it is also a threshold, a gateway leading to something entirely different. The eminent psychologist Carl Jung once spoke of a remarkable phenomenon he called synchronicity. This refers to meaningful coincidences that seem so perfect they are difficult to explain by mere chance. After experiencing significant loss, many people begin to distinctly notice these special signs. It might be a melody playing at just the right moment, or a dream suddenly revealing a hidden truth. Often it manifests as an object appearing precisely when it was most needed. From the perspective of depth psychology, such manifestations are not just emotional comforts designed to alleviate pain. They are manifestations of the unconscious that guide an individual, reminding them that what was lost has not vanished without a trace. The loved one continues to exist within them. This occurs not in a literal physical sense, but in a much more powerful way. Their presence is felt in how they change the grieving person's personality, in how their being helped shape who that person is now. The departed's voice, their characteristic gestures, the lessons they taught, all of this remains deeply imprinted in one's mind and soul. Thus, life after loss does not mean forgetting. It means integrating past experience into the present. It means continuous development. Martin fully understood this. He was a man whose life changed after the passing of his beloved wife, with whom he had spent 2 decades in marriage. For many months, the suffering was unbearable, like an endless ordeal. He felt his existence had lost all meaning and purpose without her presence. However, one day, in a moment of deep sorrow, he discovered an old notebook that belonged to her. The pages of this journal were filled with her profound reflections, intimate thoughts, and inspiring quotes about life. It was on these pages that he stumbled upon a phrase that became the catalyst for radical change. "If I ever leave before you, I want you to continue loving life for both of us." This moment, like a ray of light in utter darkness, proved to be a true turning point. He suddenly realized that his grief did not have to be an eternal burden or a lifelong sentence to sorrow. Instead, it could become a unique call, an invitation to immortalize her memory through his own full and meaningful existence. Since then, Martin dedicated himself to a noble mission, helping others who are experiencing similar pain. He managed to transform his personal loss into a renewed calling, a deeper and more meaningful way of life. Every significant loss inevitably poses a profound question of being. What spiritual legacy, what unseen traces has this person left on the landscape of my life? An effective path to gaining clarity in such a situation is to slow down, pause, and delve into sincere reflection. What exactly did they teach me that I might have previously underestimated or taken for granted? How did their presence transform my perception of the world, change my worldview? What values, ideals, or principles can I continue to uphold and honor in their cherished memory? For a person's true being lies not in their perishable physical shell, but in the profound metamorphosis they sparked within us, in the unseen changes that occurred in the soul. And when we grasp this, when we truly realize this truth, understanding comes. Loss does not destroy us to the core. On the contrary, it reformats our being, rebuilding us in utterly unimaginable ways, revealing new facets of ourself. The loss of a loved one represents one of the most significant trials an individual faces in their earthly life. This event can break one's spirit, deprive them of the ability to breathe freely, and make them doubt their capacity to ever feel whole again. However, there is an aspect rarely mentioned. Grief, this all-consuming pain, not only takes something valuable but also bestows something entirely new. Herein lies a cruel yet beautiful paradox. For despite the reality of a gaping void and the weight of oppressive absence, at the very heart of this pain lies the seed of deep transformation. Something within a person changes irrevocably. The individual becomes a renewed version of themselves, shaped by the experienced loss, but also enriched by all the meaning the departed person brought into their life. Death, therefore, is not merely a finale, but also a starting point for a new beginning. Carl Jung, a prominent thinker, understood that all phenomena in the human psyche are an integral part of a continuous evolutionary process. Nothing fades into oblivion without leaving a trace. Nothing disappears without first transforming the one who experiences that disappearance. And grief, though often experienced in isolation, also acts as a bridge to a deeper and more comprehensive understanding of the very essence of being. Perhaps it is in such moments that one needs a reminder that even in the deepest abysses of pain, the inner strength to change one's own life remains available. For true healing is not equivalent to forgetting. Healing means the ability to love again, to trust again, to live again, but more deeply, more consciously, with a much more open heart.